him. Before he died, he lived less than 48 hours. And that obviously was impactful upon me. But I think even more than that was as I grew, then I learned that there were a couple people who actually thought that my mom should have had an abortion specifically because of me. I was the youngest. And they were like, gosh, that's a lot for a little girl to go through. Like, see her sibling born and look perfect and healthy, and then have him suddenly be gone. And that, just living life and seeing how a lot of things in life are hard, don't have an easy fix, but recognizing that as devastating as that was, had they chosen to end his life when he was in my mom's womb, we would still be heartbroken and sad. It wouldn't have ended that pain. And I think that's a really hard thing about being pro-life is it's so important that we share the reality of what happens in an abortion and then the long-term effects of that, and that we work to walk with women and men who are in these situations. But it's difficult because sometimes it does require saying things that are hard. It's not an easy fix, and especially to say, no, we don't support ending the life of your child. That's not an easy thing to say, and it is telling someone like, yeah, this is not a quick fix. This is the rest of your life. But the reality is the rest of someone's life is affected whether or not they have an abortion.
Yeah, so if everyone could like this video, we'd certainly appreciate that. Like and share. We want to get a conversation going. We're going to be here live just talking about the historic overturning of Roe versus Wade. I know that former President Trump is at a rally right now. People are giving him credit, I guess, because he appointed 3 of the Supreme Court justices to the court. But it's disheartening to see that this issue is being made so political in a way. It's really not that political at the end of the day. Roe versus Wade was a terrible decision from a legal point of view. You still hear it, people saying on TV and people saying at these protests that abortion is a constitutional right. Abortion is not a constitutional right. Why? How do I know that? Well, number one, it's not in the Constitution. People say, well, guns and abortion, women have less rights than guns. Well, that's not true, actually. Like, it's illegal for a gun to kill, right? It's illegal for a gun to murder. It's illegal for a gun to be used in those situations. So it's an important distinction. But the right to bear arms is in the Second Amendment. There is no right in the Constitution spelled out that says that we need to have an abortion. And the other thing is like, as a man in this day and age, it's like really hard for men to talk about the issue of abortion because they're saying, well, you don't know what it's like. You don't have a woman's
Uterus.
body. You don't have a uterus. You don't have these organs. So therefore, you have no opinion about this whatsoever, almost as if the man doesn't take part in the procreative act. But can you talk a little more about feminism, Leona? And, feminism has been hijacked, the term, over the last few decades, particularly in the time after Roe versus Wade. Feminism has been defined in modern terms as being pro-choice.
This comment kind of ties in. Roe v. Wade also has to do with medical privacy and on the reality that healthcare decisions should be made between the client, the patient, and their provider, and that government should not be determining what a person can and cannot choose for their own health. I actually agree with that so strongly. The difference with abortion and every other healthcare procedure, that's the word I'm looking for, is that with abortion there is another person's body present. And just because abortions happen, either they happen within a clinic or they happen because of a medication that was prescribed, doesn't mean that the fact that another person is involved no longer matters.
So Will says, is it that attitude against men that has let them off the hook of all responsibility?
Yeah, I think that's a horrible thing in our culture.
It's probably to a large degree, yeah, the role of the father has been taken away from the family unit and it's been attacked in many different ways. You can see it in particular in poorer communities and communities of color. So certainly there's this idea that men don't have to take responsibility for their kids.
Mm-hmm.
And therefore it also means that we can't say, whether a baby should be kept or not, or we really don't have much say in it at all. Although it works both ways. I mean, I imagine, and I don't know as much because we don't get the behind the scenes talk about abortion. Like, I think that's one thing that's true is that women, for the most part, don't talk to men about abortions, like their past abortions or history with it. I think it's something they more or less talk to with women between themselves. What's your opinion on that?
I mean, as a woman, I guess I've never asked the people who've talked to me about their abortions. I've never asked, like, have you shared this with male friends? So I don't really know, but I could see it being that way.
What do you mean?
I've never asked someone who has shared with me about their own abortion if they also share that with.
No, but have you had people talk to you about abortion?
Oh, yes.
I never
yes,
have.
Definitely.
Nobody's ever talked to it with me.
Yeah, so it probably is something that women talk to with or talk about with other women.
In what ways?
I mean, I think just simply what we just said. If you've never had someone talk to you about their abortion, and I have, I mean, we're a case of two, so I don't think that can necessarily be applied broadly, but I think that's very possible. I do think it's interesting. I've seen a number of people share on social media that if we're going to say that women can't choose to have an abortion, then men have to be forced to provide for their children, like do a DNA test, and the men have to provide until that child reaches adulthood. And I'm not actually against that. I mean, I think that is the point, or the solution. Even in the most devastating circumstance, the solution shouldn't be ending the life of an always innocent person. I think that we, as if we're trying to be an ethical society, we should have a hard stop there. But I think there's a lot of truth to the fact that men should own up to their parenthood, which is equal parenthood to a woman. But it's a little bit difficult to do that because no matter what, even in a very healthy, relatively symptom-free pregnancy, that's affecting the woman's body directly for almost a year. So whatever work or school or whatever she's doing, that is affected in a way that the man's body isn't. And then giving birth is something that, I mean, you were very present and involved in our children's births, but your body did not go through something like what my body went through. Your body didn't have to physically heal and then physically lactate and, all of those things. So there's definitely a difference in how pregnancy and birth and parenthood affects men and women.
Can you have your face in there?
Oh, yeah. That I don't think should be ignored. It has been replaced by the government. Fatherhood's been replaced by the government is one of the comments here. Certainly in some situations, I think that is true.
So one of the points that came up that I hear over and over in the debates is about incest and rape. Mm-hmm. And I think incest in particular, it's what Biden brought up in his comments afterwards. And there's a powerful point behind incest in a way, I think, where is that an exception? Like, should we have an exception for incest? If a 10-year-old girl or 12-year-old girl is raped by her uncle or brother and becomes pregnant, like, what do you say in those situations?
It's horrible. I almost can't think of like a worse situation for a young child, a 10 or 12-year-old girl to go through. But it's where I think the reality of what happens in an abortion is really important, and recognizing and being honest about the fact that there's another human who's involved. That human did not choose to be conceived in that way. The child who's carrying the child needs and deserves all empathy and support. But is it going to heal her? Is it going to end the horror that happened to her if we choose to intentionally kill the child who was conceived?
Is it going to what?
Is it going to heal her, or is it going to end the horror of what her uncle did to her if we kill the child who was conceived?
I don't know. What do you think?
That wouldn't be fair to make a child carry another child. I mean, it's not fair. But is it fair to the child who is conceived to kill them? I mean, there's not. Is there any other situation where we say, wow, this horrific thing happened, let's directly kill an innocent person? They would probably die during birth.
See, one of the issues with this type of argument is that it's used very often because it is a powerful argument. You are going to force a 12-year-old girl, that's what you're advocating for, who is pregnant by no action of her own, with somebody who shares genetic material, which increases the risk that the offspring is going to have issues, genetic disorders, or various other issues because of it. And then forcing that girl to go through that whole process could be equally as traumatic. Like, could you imagine being a 12-year-old girl giving birth to a child that was conceived through incest?
I cannot.
But I wonder how many, what percentage of abortions that makes up for. And I know that there's states in the United States where you can't.
Yeah.
Like a woman would not be able to do that.
I mean, one question I would have if someone is saying that is, okay, are you okay with then never directly killing a human unless the human was conceived in rape or incest? And if the answer is no, then there's certainly a much deeper problem. That's not actually your concern, is that 12-year-old child who's pregnant. If I ask someone, okay, are you fine then with saying we will never intentionally end a life through abortion unless that life was conceived in incest? And if the person says, no, I'm not okay with that, then clearly that person's concern is not actually for the 10 or 12-year-old child. They're choosing the most extreme situation and the smallest proportion of why abortions are done. I mean, this is a point. You said, I think it's fair to protect the life that is already living, but the reality is it's the unborn, the child who's conceived is also living. I mean, if one was living and one was not, we would have no discussion. Then it's like an appendectomy. But the percentage, Guttmacher Institute is the research branch of Planned Parenthood, and they say the stats of how many abortions happen from rape or incest. And it is, I think it's less than 2.5%.
It's a lot, though.
It's a lot of babies, yeah, if you count the number of, yeah.
So what do you think we should do about that?
I don't think that we should be intentionally ending people's lives.
So you think that the girls should be forced to have the baby to birth or to term?
What do you think?
I'm asking you first.
Yes, I do not think that a sane society can allow for it to be legally okay to end the life of an innocent human. And that is what happens in any abortion. So yeah, it's
so do you find it acceptable in any circumstances
to intentionally end an innocent life? No.
Through abortion? Not even the threatening of life of a mother?
So then it's not, and even Planned Parenthood is clear about this, that then the discussion that we're having is not ending the life that's inside of the womb. Then we're removing the life, just like we had with one of our babies, who, when I had an ectopic pregnancy, sorry, I'm getting distracted by this. When our baby was removed from my fallopian tube, our baby was removed whole without destroying them first. Our baby had already died, but the goal, they didn't know for sure if he or she was alive or dead before removing them from my fallopian tube. And the goal of the procedure is not to end the baby's life. The goal was to remove the baby from the fallopian tube where they wouldn't have lived anyways. So yeah, in a situation where, I mean, if at the very least we should be removing babies and trying to save their lives. What do you think about those cases? Like,
I mean, I'm still kind of hung up a bit on the case of incest. I think that, there's also a difference between legal and what your own personal circumstances are. And I think that this is like a great example. Like, for instance, if I was an elected politician, I believe that I would I would support an exception for rape and incest.
You think abortion is okay in those cases?
I don't think it's okay, but I don't think rape's okay either. I think
Mm-hmm.
that life can be really, there's a lot of gray area in life. And I think that, especially for like a young girl,
Mm-hmm.
you know, of like when you're talking very young, if you're gonna force a young girl to get pregnant and to carry it, you've changed that girl's entire life. And like maybe there's some virtue in it, you know, maybe, but maybe not, because that girl's young enough where, at least in our society, if you're 12 years old, you are not old enough to be a parent. You're not mature enough in our time. Agree. I think in the past, maybe that was true in different civilizations, but in our current societal structure, if you're 13, 14, 15-year-old girl, you are not capable. I mean, there's exceptions, I'm sure, totally, but you are not capable of taking care of a child. So all of a sudden you're creating this situation where, you know, something has to be done about it. And
so here's one question: process knowing that their body probably couldn't handle it. I mean, I have thought about this. I don't know if I'd have to talk to an OB, but that you potentially would schedule a C-section for the sake of that girl, so that she didn't go through labor. I know. I mean,
but she's still going to have to walk around fully pregnant, and people are going to ask her questions, and there's going to be tremendous amount of pressure being put on this gal or young girl and
child.
Yeah, and I think that has to be a consideration. I think it's absolutely, in a way, like, to just be so black and white about it. I don't think that most life is that way, and those would be the only two like exceptions I would even possibly think about in terms of a legal position, you know. And then
I'm not as like interested in the legal position. I care more what you think is moral, and then I think laws should follow. So I know you are a political person, so you think of the legal, but I'd rather know if you actually think that's good to intentionally kill an innocent person.
I never said it's good, but there's a lot of things that are legal and that aren't good. And there's a lot of gray area in life, and I don't think it's good for a 12-year-old girl to be forced to be fully pregnant either, because I think that'll devastate that person in a lot of ways. It'll stigmatize her.
But you realize that her life she has already encountered a devastating attack.
So why make it worse?
A vicious attack.
So why make it worse?
So do you think that it's worse for her to then know that she allowed this innocent child to live? Or is it worse for her to experience a devastating attack?
I think if the girl is so...
And then just a minute, and then also live her life knowing that her innocent child, her own child, was killed.
So again,
all of those are
if you put it in the perspective of the real world, if it's a 12-year-old girl, a 13-year-old girl, you could theoretically, she would make her not even aware of the whole situation, right? Like,
so you think a parent who somehow allowed their child to be in that situation where their uncle raped them would be suddenly like astute enough of the whole situation to do that for their child?
I
mean, there are big problems going on when someone doesn't protect their child enough to let that happen.
Well, if it's family, I mean, it certainly can happen.
Almost every case, like when a child is in that situation, I can almost guarantee you they gave their parents warning signs that were ignored. So the likelihood of those parents who ignored the warning signs still allowed their child to be in that situation, I don't think they're going to suddenly like sneakily have their child get an abortion. I don't know.
It's pretty, you're making some assumptions about the whole thing, but
yeah, for sure. But I think those are some real things that come into play. So it's less than 0.5% of abortions are because of incest, according to Guttmacher.
Less than what?
Less than 0.5%.
Okay.
Of all abortions are done from incest, which still,
that's a lot.
Even if it's,
a lot.
Oh yeah, because abortion is very prominent. So
how many abortions?
What about children that get taken? Absolutely. I mean, this is why another thing it's difficult to see people say like, we need to have abortion for these heinous situations where children are raped, but also ignore the fact that child trafficking is very prominent. And not care about that. I mean, it's one of the reasons why it's a huge problem. Like all of this should be coming together. If we're defending the innocent, we need to be defending children from being in situations where they're heinously abused. Oh, yeah, I probably didn't say anything that great, but I just said, he said, can you repeat it? It's difficult when people say we need to have abortions because children are raped and become pregnant. When I've not once seen that same person seem very passionate about ending child trafficking. So I agree. What about children who are taken? We should be standing up for them. We do need to prevent, or we need to protect everyone who's innocent, whether it's children who are being raped and abused by family members or strangers, or whether it's children in the womb. But that's an interesting thing with children who are raped by a stranger or trafficked. I don't know how prevalent it is, but I know that there are at least some situations where traffickers have brought young girls into Planned Parenthoods to get an abortion because they became pregnant from rape, and Planned Parenthood has covered it up. So again, I don't know if it's like 5 a year where that's happened, but it certainly happened. So, I mean, there are a lot of problems in our society. And I think the question is, do we make these heinous and very real situations better by directly ending innocent life? Or do we not? And then, how do we address all of these situations?
Here's another thing that I've seen just coming up in these debates of after this the Dobbs Jackson decision came out, and one of it's about our foster care system and the adoption process that we currently have. Many people point out that the adoption system in the United States is broken. The foster care system is broken. And, I don't want to stereotype, because it'll get bad press. Like one foster parent abuses a kid, that makes the news, and it can ruin the reputations. We know good foster parents out there. Like we've looked into adoption through the county, and we've seen a lot of the people who are involved, and there's good people involved, and you need to have a very good heart to adopt somebody whose parents or natural parents' rights were terminated. There's a lot of challenges associated with that. But given that we have so many challenges in the current adoption system, like how can we make it better? How can we make it better so that it facilitates more healthy adoption? You have an idea?
I don't have an idea. I agree that it's a problem. I wish I was a social worker and an attorney or someone who was privy to that, but I would only be guessing if I said.
I mean, the current system, a little bit about the system, right? The current system is basically 3 different ways that you can adopt. The first way is through foster care, through like usually a county program. That's when it involves parents whose rights were terminated either temporarily or permanently, and they go into the foster system. So that's one way to adopt. Another way is through American adoption, which the current process is extremely expensive.
Domestic infant adoption is expensive.
Right. That's the only form there is. Like, there's no child adoption that's non-foster related. But regardless, so if you want to adopt a baby in the United States,
it's very expensive.
And it's not through the foster system. It's very expensive and it's very difficult. You basically, the way it's done is you spend 25, 50 grand, 100 grand to be part of an agency, and you go into this book. And when parents or single mothers or sometimes young couples or young unmarried couples or even married couples decide they don't want to have their baby, but they don't want to have an abortion, they literally go through these books, right? And they contact one of these agencies, and then they find a parent or 2 parents or prospects, and you're like, okay, this one or that one. And we know people who've done it that way. It seems a little bit convoluted because you have to be chosen, and it's like competitive. And
at the same time, there's something ethical about that. I mean, it's the biological parent choosing someone else to parent their child. So in some sense, it makes sense that you have to be chosen, I think. I don't know.
And then the last way is international adoption, which is pretty much done, right?
I don't know if that's true. I mean, it was pretty frowned upon in the classes that we took. Like we were told a lot of, I didn't like fact check any of what we were told, but we were basically told that there are a lot of unethical situations that can happen with international adoption. Like, I mean, I want to be careful. Like there are a lot of adopted people and adoptive parents, but there can be situations where children are inappropriately taken from their biological parents in order to be adopted across seas.
Right. But my main point is that international adoptions pretty much come to an end. And it used to be from South Korea to the United States, there's tons and tons of adoption that occurred. Russia, same thing.
Romania.
But they, one by one, Central America, Guatemala, different areas there, but they basically have cut it off, where now international adoption has become, it's almost like a black market, like you were describing. Like it's kind of done under the table in most cases now, from what I believe. So, but yeah, it's just interesting though, like the adoption system, like we talk about having a culture of life. We talk about supporting women and supporting families after abortion, or in response or to prevent abortion, but we're way behind in terms of being able to provide these support networks and to give parents viable options, you know. Totally. And with modern adoption too, you know, one of the big things that occurs now is that the natural parents will still have a relationship with the child after they're born, and they might see each other once a month, or maybe just get a letter once a year, but there is some sort of like structured contact, which I don't know if that's a good thing, if we need more of that or not.
I mean, again, from what we were told, apparently that, and I'm not trying to cast doubt on it by saying apparently, but apparently that has shown to be much better for children, for adopted children, to have that open adoption. I mean, I think if I remember correctly, the classes that we took, they told us like, you will be open to an open adoption because it is the best for the child. And again, I'm not casting doubt on that. I'm just saying we were very clearly told that. And this was considering children who are in foster care. So this wasn't like infant adoption. So in these cases, it was biological parents who did not choose to have their child be adopted. It's biological parents who are no longer able, or for a period of time can't be with their children. And it was emphasized that it was very important to have an open adoption still, or an open foster family relationship.
The other big issue that I've seen, by the way, thank you to everybody who's been liking the video. We appreciate that. This is our first time we've ever gone live on TikTok, and we just felt inspired because last night I was going through like all the debates that are going on. And I actually must say, like, I was encouraged. You know, most of the debates I saw were from people who were pro-choice or against the overturn of Roe versus Wade. But like, I was actually really impressed with like the amount of respect, at least from the debate, from an oratory point of view. I didn't read the comments quite as much, but I think that it's conversations like this that we're going to need to have. Like, I know in our home state, we live in Florida now, but our home state of Minnesota is now surrounded by states that are going to have more restrictive abortion laws. And Minnesota is going to become basically, out of Iowa, South Dakota, North Dakota, Michigan, and Wisconsin, it's going to be the least restrictive state for abortions. And Governor Walz today signed an executive order that basically said we're going to provide abortions for all our neighboring states who are unable to get one. So,
have you heard of camping?
What's that?
People, I'm not quite sure why they're being secretive about it. Like, I have very strong views on abortion. I am not going to ridicule somebody who's choosing to get an abortion. I never have. But people are saying if you want to go camping, and it's code word for if you need an abortion, here are the states where you can get them. And I've not verified any of the graphs, but all the graphs I've seen, Minnesota is the only one that's dark in the whole Midwest area. So Minnesota is clearly being shown on these maps as a place where you can go, quote unquote, camping.
Camping? What does that mean now?
It's a code word for getting an abortion in another state. if you have to cross state
Does it
lines.
mean that is it illegal? If you're, say, a South Dakota resident and you go to Minnesota to get an abortion, is that illegal? I don't think it is.
I don't know. Well, that's why I said I'm not sure why they're using a code word. I mean, I guess I kind of get it. There are a lot of people who think nobody should be aborting their child, but
that's the other point that I've seen in these debates is about, and I've seen it in the protests with the women who got the red hands and they're carrying around coat hangers, and they're saying that there's going to be a lot more back alley abortions, and that now abortion's not going to become more rare. It's just going to become less safe. And I know that there's a history of abortions taking place by unlicensed individuals or people in neighborhoods, back in the day. I'm not quite sure if it still goes on to this day, but is it going to, are we going to see cases now of women who bled to death at some like neighborhood abortion mill that's being done in somebody's basement? Are we going to see that?
What do you think? Oh, I have to answer these right now. And then we will, it's a great question, thoughts on financial aid for pregnant women. But regarding unsafe abortion, first, this is the easy part of it, and then I will get to the
I'm going to flip this so it goes up and down now.
But the easy part of it, I just have to first real quickly say, TikTok makes your hair look really bad. Like it's like you have to have your hair in a ponytail or a really short hair, or else it just makes your hair look funny. So the easy question is that there is a lot of evidence to show that when abortions are restricted, there are less abortions. One of, I think, the biggest profile situations was a mom who gave birth to twins in Texas because she found out like the day before the Texas heartbeat bill was passed. And I think it was the Washington Post did a whole article on how she would have had an abortion, but because of the law, she didn't. So I do think that's one thing that I don't think it's true that when you outlaw abortions, every single person who is going to have one will still figure out a way to have them. And I'm not saying that to make light of any woman who would have a back alley abortion and be harmed by it. I'm just saying that it's an important reality to remember, that I do think lives are saved when abortion is restricted. And there are, even Guttmacher is very clear that when abortions are restricted, there are less abortions. Again, Guttmacher Institute is the research branch of Planned Parenthood. So I think that's an important thing to remember. But then as far as...
So what is, if you wanted to get a back alley abortion, I'm using that term loosely, but do people, is it just the coat hanger? Is that how it's done? Or are there
I know that there
medications or...
I know there are medications that, so I'm not an expert in this, but I do know this for sure. Right after the Texas heartbeat bill, there were instructions, there are still instructions online, but they came to my attention, instructions on how to have a medical abortion at home, like a do-it-yourself, nothing to do with a coat hanger, nothing physical, but ingesting medication to make your body, to force your body to miscarry your baby. So I know that's one way, which is very different than something physical like a coat hanger. There's something I'm looking up really quick. What are some of your thoughts?
Well, I think that there's probably a bunch of different ways that it can be done. Like, is it going to become more commonplace? I would say if somebody's really hell bent on getting an abortion, probably traveling somewhere would be the most logical method or the way to do it. Like, I can't imagine that there's too many good ways to have a back alley abortion. I mean, I think sometimes people will, the coat hangers, or there's, can you stop looking at it? It's distracting me. Or there's whirlpools, like people will sit in hot tubs for a while. I've heard that. Like, the pill is still going to be available, right? What do you call that pill?
Well, there's the morning after pill, or RU486. Is that what you're thinking of? But then these mail order, I was trying to find more details on not the mail order, but like the do-it-yourself pill one. I'll just say this. I was trying to find it, but anyone who wants to know, pro-life millennial on Instagram, it's a pro-life source, obviously, but she does do an excellent job of having actual sources for everything that I've seen her say, and she does like a deep dive into whether or not back alley abortions will increase and how many abortions were there prior to it becoming legal, at least in the United States. And it is really good. It's at least good food for thought on that. Thoughts on financial aid for pregnant women? What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think that we need to, especially right away in these states that are going into full restriction mode, or they're going to be restricting it severely. I think that they need to set up support systems, taxpayer funded and private, and through not-for-profits and through churches, the whole works, to support women and men, both, because it takes two to tango, so that they can, number one, carry a baby to term in the healthiest manner possible. That's one issue that we've learned about when we were taking our adoption classes through foster care, is the issue of fetal alcohol syndrome. And when you get into situations in a lot of these pregnancies, now making broad kind of assumptions here, but that in these states where it's going to become more restrictive, where these women would have otherwise maybe have gotten an abortion, and now they are not necessarily being forced to carry in term, but they're in an environment where they're basically having to do so, that fetal alcohol syndrome, any sort of toxins being introduced to these babies is something that people are going to need to be conscious of.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so preventing that, education and resources and safe houses and places where they can actually stay.
Yeah, I totally agree. The other thing, and then I'll answer your question about guests. I'm all for that. We'll see if we can. But the other thing that's interesting is
how do we put the guest on? How do we do that, Mickey? Do we go to co-host, or what do you do?
I'll talk while you look into that. So currently, a woman who's pregnant can receive full insurance coverage through the birth of her child, and then baby will be insured after. But the problem is that I don't believe that the woman continues to be insured after. So that is a step in the right direction. And I genuinely think a lot of people don't know that, because I have seen a lot of people say, like, at the very least, can we provide prenatal care for women? And yes, and that is actually something that we do have. And that's really, really good. But the problem is, and it's also good that we continue to cover babies after birth as they grow. But women who just had a baby, or whether or not you had a baby, women also need continued health care, especially in that postpartum period. Sorry, I'm distracted by the screen. But so that's one thing that I guess is good in our country. And honestly, I'm not sure why we do such a poor job of making that clear to women, that you can receive full coverage for prenatal care. Your baby will continue to be covered after birth if you decide to parent them. But that still doesn't help the mom to have continued coverage after birth.
So talk a little more about a culture of life.
Co-host? Did you tried that already?
Yeah.
Okay.
Talk a little more about a culture of life. I'm going to look this up how to do it, but talk a little more about the vision of what a culture of life is. Like, do we have that right now? Are we going to head there? Or is this going to be something that, people have said there's two issues that could create civil war in the United States. And that's why I question the timing of this too. I look at everything through the lens these days of they're trying to destroy America. They're trying to divide the citizenry as much as possible so that we're fighting each other. Meanwhile, the powers that be can basically destroy our Constitution, lead us into chaos, and then corral everybody into a new type of government and / financial system. But, is this, if we're going to embrace this culture of life, what is this going to look like? Can you talk a little bit more about that vision?
Yeah. I'll just start with kind of what I know and what is very exciting to me. when we were in Minnesota, I got to work with an organization called Guiding Star and help to establish a Guiding Star center in St. Paul, Minnesota. Um, and this particular center joined an already existing life care center. So I think most know, but most life care centers provide things like free pregnancy tests, free ultrasounds, which, by the way, twice when I have been at a Planned Parenthood, a woman went in to try to get a free pregnancy test and was told it cost $15, which is crazy. I have never spent that much for one pregnancy test. So I'm not saying end all Planned Parenthoods. I want them to use their money to do good things, but uh, providing a free pregnancy test actually is a relatively big service, apparently, if even Planned Parenthood is not providing them. So, anyways, free pregnancy tests, free ultrasounds, if they have sonographers there. Sometimes free blood tests, typically free STI testing, and then a lot of material resources, and sometimes transportation resources like helping someone to consistently get to their job, or like I said, material resources like diapers and formula and clothes, things like that. So this life care center joined Guiding Star and became a Guiding Star center. And so they now provide even more resources like childcare for children when you're there for your appointment. So if you have children who are already born, they can be cared for while you're at your appointment, so you can focus on your health when you're there. And then they now provide full prenatal care when they're there. I believe they have 4 exam rooms in the building, which I have never seen in a life care center. And I got to, the last time I was in Minnesota, I got to see this building, and it's amazing to see these 4 beautiful exam rooms in there. And then they work with doulas, both birth doulas when you are giving birth, and then postpartum doulas as well. Breastfeeding classes, in addition to providing formula for people who need it, and then really working on trying to help people kind of establish those next steps in life. So at one point, they were doing a lot with providing clothes for people for interviews, helping people to get interviews for different jobs, things like that. So that's one thing, just providing more holistic resources for people who need them. But then another really awesome thing with this Guiding Star model is that they work to have a place where both people with insurance and people without insurance can receive identical care. So one, you're there all together, realizing like we're all in this together. These things don't need to be divisions, but also having both insured and uninsured people there helps to defray some of the costs for everyone, so that everyone can be receiving excellent care. So I think, I mean, that's one very, very specific thing. There's so much else to life than just, I think this particular center helps provide material resources up to children who are either age 3 or age 5. And obviously there's a lot of life past that. So it's a good start, but it's not everything. So that's something that I know.
What about in the schools? What about, are kids taught about a culture of life in school?
It's a good question. I know that I have thoughts on comprehensive sex education, and I certainly think at the very least, children who are given any type of sex ed to know that using birth control is not a guarantee that you will make someone else pregnant. I think at the very least, if a child is receiving sex education, we have a right to tell them that, so that they are fully informed. They're not an adult, but if we're giving them this information and telling them to act in a certain way and use a certain method if they're sexually active, they need to know the failure rates, and they need to know where to turn if they pregnant or get someone else pregnant, because as we all know, it happens quite a bit. I should have pulled this up before, but also Guttmacher, I just always use Guttmacher since they're Planned Parenthood's research. I think it's almost 50% of women who get an abortion used birth control during the cycle in which she got pregnant. So I'm not saying that birth control never prevents unplanned pregnancies, but it's certainly not like it's not like, oh, 1% of abortions used birth control and all the rest did not, or anything like
I mean, one of the things with the culture of life, and I've seen this on this trope on the discussions and debates surrounding this, is conservatives or Republicans, however you want to label people, they only care about babies when they're in the womb. Once that baby's born, they don't care about that baby. And I think they use examples like conservatives are against welfare or food stamps or different forms of welfare. Yeah, I mean, I think in general, there's an attitude amongst Republicans that they're against welfare. That it's more of like grab your boots, get to work and just work as hard as you can, and you'll make it. And there's a negative stigma about welfare, that it's destroying families, that it's handout, that it makes people lazy.
I mean, maybe this is what you're describing. I certainly think welfare ought to be temporary. If somebody is going to starve, if we remove it, we should not remove it. But I would say I'm fully for welfare, but I am not, because I would not want to be in this situation. I would never want someone to forever be in a situation that I would not want to be in myself. So, for example, I am not going to say, we did it, if half the parents in the country will always have to feed their children whatever the government provides, whether it's through free lunches or whatever, because I don't want to provide that to my children, because those lunches before, and I am severely unimpressed. So if I don't want to feed that to my child every day, I am not going to have my goal be some other mom having to forever provide that for her child every day, have that be the only food she can provide. I would rather create a society where eventually every mom and every dad and all parents are able to choose what food to provide to their children. But I'm certainly not against welfare in the meantime.
But how on earth can you say that, though, in this modern economy, in this inflationary economy? And I'm not just saying these last 2 years. Yeah. I'm saying for the last 30, 40 years. Like, if you're a single mom, matters. But if you're a single mom and you couldn't get an abortion, so you got pregnant 3 times, say you have 3 kids, young children, your baby daddy's long gone. So how much money do you need to make every year to feed 3 mouths with no welfare? So say
a lot. We can barely do it.
So how on earth is that going to happen?
By politicians actually caring about the economy. I mean, to me, it seems that like all politicians, Democrats and Republicans, at least at the federal level, have been intentionally making life less and less and less affordable. And the reason I think it's appalling is because it's making it less and less and less likely that more and more people will get off of welfare. In fact, I think it's doing the opposite. More and more people are going to need to get on it. And my reason for saying that is not that I don't want welfare. It's that I don't want to be on welfare forever for a myriad of reasons. So why would my goal be a single mom being on welfare forever? Don't I want just as good for her as for me?
If you're a single mom, so what are you saying, that mom should leave and she should work 50, 60 hours a week?
No, I'm just saying we should be creating a society where the goal is not get more and more and more people on welfare and keep them on welfare. The goal should be, let's create a society where life is affordable on one salary.
Well, then how do you do that?
Well, I'm not an economist. I go to you for those questions. You're much better at answering those. So you tell us how you do that.
Well, I'm just posing the question that it's easy to have these ideals and just be like, oh, the politicians should fix it.
I certainly think life was more affordable under Trump, was it not? For us, it was.
He spent money.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
He spent more money than his predecessor did.
I totally agree with that.
In 4 years. I mean, $5 trillion was spent in 2020.
I don't disagree with any of that.
And that led to more spending programs. And so we're in a situation now.
Our weekly bills, I totally agree with that. But our weekly bills were more affordable then. So that's a good thing. So, however, I mean, I'm not going to pretend I know something I don't know. I'm not an economist. I don't feel bad about that.
Right.
I'm just saying that the goal should not be welfare, more people on welfare. The goal should be a society where less people need welfare. And that's, an unethical belief at
I'm
all.
not saying it's unethical. I'm just saying it's very idealistic, and it's easy to just say, yeah, we don't want to have people on welfare forever. Nobody wants to have food stamps their entire life. Like, but how is that going to be done? Like, it can't just happen through a snap of the fingers. It's not going to happen just through balancing the budget, or, you know, we're in a real pickle right now in terms of the economy.
Yeah.
And like, to feed 3-4 mouths and to work full time and to not have support, and say you don't have the support of a family. Like, I think that these are strong considerations that people are going to need to make, and especially in these states where they're going to be severely restricting abortions, they're going to be facing these types of questions.
Yeah, absolutely.
How are they going to, if they're going to force a mom to carry her babies to term and to take care of those babies, how is that mom going to actually do it? In your
in most situations, you're not forcing a mom. In most situations.
What do you mean?
In the rare cases of rape and incest, which are the strong minority of abortion. So with the exception of those few cases, nobody who becomes pregnant is being forced to be a mom. They already are a mom. So, I mean, it is important to be realistic about that. You have done something where you knew you could get pregnant and you did. Someone saying you can't intentionally have your child killed is not forcing you to parent your child.
No.
You acted. And it is really, really important that we make there's a vast difference between a 12-year-old who is heinously abused and becomes pregnant, and an adult in whatever situation they're in who willingly engages in an act that ends up leading to them being pregnant.
Oh, look, that's how you do it. Somehow invite. No.
Oh, there. Someone else said.
No, they didn't say it. I think you have to join something or something along those lines.
But we could invite them.
What do
you think the solutions? I know. So somehow Mickey has to. I don't know how. What do you think that those states can? What can South Dakota and North Dakota
Mickey,
do?
do you see a button up there that says join? What do I think?
Yeah.
I think that we're in a real pickle, and I think that there are no easy solutions, and that it's easy to, and this is what we're going to have to deal with, because we have lived in a Roe versus Wade world for almost 50 years. So we have 50 years under this precedent that, yes, you can get an abortion in most of these states whenever you want it. I mean, some states were still more restrictive. No. But now they're under a different pretense. So yes, they're not being forced to. Yes, you have choice with who you procreate with, and there's consequences to that. There always have been. But now you're saying that this option is no longer there. So you have to deal with the real world in terms of raising your kids, paying for them, and whatnot. And if you're going to have this position that we can't have welfare eternally.
I never said that.
Well, you said you don't want people on there permanently.
I absolutely think that we will need welfare eternally. I just don't want any person to be on welfare eternally. I think we will always need to have
maybe not eternally, but is 18 years eternally? Because, that's how long the kid's going to take till they're an adult. And even then,
wouldn't you hope for those parents to be off of welfare?
I'm just saying that's, yes, of course, but that's not reality. What I'm saying is
I'm not sure everyone hopes for that. I think some people actually are okay with people being on welfare eternally. Like, they actually think as long as someone's on welfare, we accomplished we're good. We cared for them. Whereas I would say thank God there is welfare for people who need it. And I always think there will be a need. And so I
guess you're missing my point here.
Okay.
If you're 19 years old, not college educated, you're pregnant, and then you get pregnant again, and you're pregnant again. So you're 23 years old, and you've never really had a job in your life, and you now have 3 children who maybe normally that person would have aborted those children, but they live in a state where it's now more restrictive.
Sure. Yep.
So what's that person going to do for the next 18 years to pay for their kids, to pay for the food, to pay for the housing, if they're not going to be on welfare for 18 years? Like, what's that person's option?
We certainly know single parents who have cared for their children without welfare, so it's not impossible. And I'm not putting down anyone who hasn't.
Did you not
saying
hear
there
my
are
example?
situations.
They're 22 years old, never went to college, never had any job before.
Yeah.
Like, they have 3 children.
I mean, it used to be much more possible to
I'm not saying used to be. I'm
support a
saying
family
now.
without
I'm saying
a
now.
college education.
I'm saying now. I'm not saying in 1950. I'm saying.
Well, that was my question for you. What should states do now? I mean, I think this is why.
I think we're going to have
the
to
economy
probably.
matters.
I think these states are probably going to have to pony up, and they're going to have to put a lot more welfare programs into place. I think that food stamps are going to have to increase. I think that rent certificates and rent vouchers and different programs for housing are going to necessarily have to increase.
Yeah.
And I think that there's going to be, at least for a generation or two, there's going to be more women who are reliant on welfare.
Yeah, that might be true.
And I think ideally, it's one thing to have the idealism, but it's another thing like where the rubber actually meets the road. I think it's a very difficult question. And especially if you live in a poorer state, or if the economy continues to slow down and inflation continues to increase, this is going to be, it's a much broader issue even outside of abortion. But how are we all going to be able to pay $3,000 in rent?
Right.
And
I mean, that's what I'm
$1,500
saying.
a month. And
more people are going to be on welfare, even if more children are not born. Even if all of the women who you're saying will now have children, if somehow, like, if people are like, oh, wow, I think more people are going to be on welfare. We just lost our generation doesn't want kids.
What do you think?
I mean, a lot of that's all very tragic. I do think less people want kids. Well, I don't know. I don't really have a basis to say that. I don't know what people used to think. I have definitely read from Pew Research that not that many like 20 and 30-year-old, can't point to, a very specific study, but yeah.
So the other thing that we see that's creeping up in terms of the new changes that are going to be made in the post-Roe world is these corporations who are offering now incentive packages. I saw a whole list of these big national
Patagonia
corporations that are basically going
Disney,
to be providing abortion, travel
Tesla,
expenses, and
yeah.
Can you explain that?
Yeah. I think you said it really well. I think they're giving people, I think I've seen $4,000 to travel out of state to get an abortion out of state and then travel back, which I would strongly argue that's not a culture of life. It's certainly a pro-business decision because that costs less money than covering a woman's maternity leave if she carries the baby to term. And say you're already providing health insurance for that woman and she has no kids, and then obviously she gives birth to her child and parents her child, and that child is added on to her insurance plan. Like, there are a lot of costs to the company if the company's employees have children, rather than driving across state lines for a couple days to have their child aborted.
Do you think are they able to, like, if you live in South Dakota, are you able to order the pill there, the morning
Great
after
question.
pill?
Do you want me to look?
Mm-mm.
No, I don't know.
I'm just wondering if that's an option.
Yeah,
it probably is. I mean, who's going to really know?
I don't know.
Guess I wouldn't. Yeah, there's a lot of things that are going to pop up. I think probably the thing that I'm the most nervous about is how is our country going to survive? How is our nation going to survive with such polar opposites and polar ideological differences? It seems kind of more hopeless than ever in terms of that. And there's part of me that wonders if it's just time to just divide it all up. This state does this state does this, because I feel like there is no real strong national consensus anymore, even though there should be surrounding the Bill of Rights. right? The way that the whole Constitution was structured was that we had our individual rights that were essentially guaranteed by the Constitution and supposed to be protected by the federal government. And we've gone way beyond that. Like, there's no respect for the freedom of speech anymore. We don't have freedom of press. We don't have respect for freedom of religion. You know, God's basically taken out of the public schools. The issue of abortion, like, people can, I mean, we can have debates about it, but if one person's on this side and another person's on that side, there's not a whole lot of compromise there. So the real question is how are we going to move forward from this? Like, how do you envision that happening?
Well, I think about this a lot. Like, I have definitely been against abortion my whole life. And I have been very close to people who are strongly pro-abortion. And we got along really well until recently. So I think
because of abortion?
I don't know.
Or is it because of Trump?
It's probably, I think it's more because of Trump or because of, I don't know. I don't know. Maybe COVID, maybe, I'm not sure. And my point is, I think that people were just as divided on abortion before. Like, I have always, as soon as I was convinced, and I didn't accept it right away as truth, but as soon as I was convinced at a young age that abortion intentionally ends a person, and I didn't take any time to realize that that person's innocent. As soon as I realized that, I knew this cannot ever be the solution. And it doesn't mean that, like, things are going to be easy. But they keep us divided on purpose. Yeah, I do think they keep us divided on purpose. But I think about this a lot because there was division on abortion, and yet I feel that people got along better. And there is a part of me that thinks maybe it's just because of social media. Maybe it's just because, like, people knew what I thought about abortion. I knew what they thought about abortion, but it's not like we heard each other's platitudes about this ever. So we knew we had this very different view, but we never felt judged by one another. And so we could still live, harmoniously.
Well, I think we should address Stranger Things if you're still there. Thank you for the comments, Stranger Things. They say, my body, my choice. Abortion is essential healthcare. You hear that often. Abortion is healthcare, reproductive rights. Is abortion healthcare, Liana?
Well, it's not. I agree that if something is happening to your body, it is your choice, but there is another body involved in abortion. And I'm not sure how we as a society and how healthcare providers who know that continue to overlook that reality. But the phrase, my body, my choice, just simply doesn't apply when it comes to abortion, because it's at least two bodies, more if you're pregnant with multiples. I do not think abortion is essential healthcare because the first tenet of healthcare is to do no wrong. So intentionally ending someone's life is certainly causing harm. So I think actually abortion is the opposite of healthcare. And I know some would probably be more, I don't know, understanding or poetic, but I'm kind of at a point where I'm tired of people in healthcare saying, and I don't know if you, Stranger Things, are in healthcare, but a lot in healthcare are very clear about what happens in an abortion, and they still will use these statements that just don't make sense. Like, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say the my body, my choice thing, that was a issue, bodily autonomy with the vaccine and the vaccine mandates. Probably shouldn't say the V word, but just how that all played in. And, if you believe in bodily autonomy for abortion, then you have to believe in bodily autonomy for
the vaccine when it's literally your life. Oh, sorry, I just said it again.
But but then that comes down to, like, the efficacy and what the doses actually really do. If, and we've had this conversation so many times, like, if the doses, the mRNA actually did protect others, if it did prevent spread, if it did stop transmission, then I think there'd be, like, a stronger argument to be made. But
yeah, then we could at least discuss it. But I would say even in that case, it's still a hypothetical. Maybe you getting the mRNA is going to protect someone else. Maybe. But certainly when you choose to have an unborn child aborted, you're directly harming them. You're directly doing something to someone else's body, always, in all situations with an abortion.
But yeah, Polaroid, or what is it?
Polaroid.
No, not
Oh, thank you.
pro-choice, not pro-choice.
Thanks for becoming a
But
top
thank
one
you.
viewer.
We're pro-life. You know, that means different things to different people. Like, we believe in the culture of life. Like, we believe in pro-life is not just the unborn, right? Being pro-life is a way of looking at the world. It's protecting those of us who are most vulnerable. So that would include babies.
Mhm.
It includes the disabled. It includes the elderly, people who are in senior homes, people who can't protect themselves. It includes children who can be taken advantage of by adults. It includes undocumented immigrants who can be taken advantage of through trafficking, through basically slavery, through that whole thing. So
Yep,
too much focus, I think, with the pro-life community has been on Roe versus Wade. It's been on abortion. It's been on babies. And I think that that's misguided, and it's actually faltered the movement quite a bit, because it's left people who are pro-life vulnerable to the attacks. And I think they're rightfully so in certain cases, that, oh, you only just care about babies. And the second that baby's born, you forget about them, or you forget about the mother, or you never talk about the mother's needs and wants and how hard it is to raise children, which is true. And especially if you're a single mom or a single dad,
it's hard when you're not help, right?
It's incredibly difficult. So, that's why, having that culture where life is defended and protected and encouraged, something we don't have right now, and we've never experienced, I don't think.
Mickey, I am against the death penalty, at least in the United States where we have prisons. Tony can maybe go into his thoughts, but can I first really quickly? So I'd love to know your thoughts, Mickey. I am against it. I do not think we should be intentionally ending someone's life, even when they're not innocent, as long as we can prevent them from harming someone else. I think a rapist should be in prison for life. I do not understand how someone can rape another person and only be in prison for a certain amount of time, but most definitely against the death penalty, personally. But to real quickly say, you said that you think the pro-life movement has focused too much on Roe v. Wade. I'm going to push back on you a little bit. Like a week ago, when I looked up again the definition of pro-life, it still meant specifically abortion and euthanasia. So it is important to realize that, like, that's what being pro-life means. It does not mean that all of the other things that you said that I hold just as dearly don't matter. But it's important that, like, words mean something. Otherwise, none of us can even dialogue. So pro-life has to do with intentionally ending an innocent person's life. And it's difficult for me to hear someone say that anybody has focused too much on Roe v. Wade for a couple of reasons. One, there are a lot of people who understand that abortion intentionally ends an innocent life who have not really done anything to help end abortion. So the weight and the work of trying to recognize the humanity of an unborn child, the humanity of every person, has fallen to very few. So it's actually really hard for me to hear, like, wait, they've focused too much? Like, they're the ones carrying this cross. Like, so few people have been joining them. So no, I don't understand how the people who have devoted their lives to providing the most basic human right to the most defenseless among us somehow should have also been devoting, or it seemed, this is kind of what I take from what you said. You think those individuals should have also spent just as much time on everything else. I disagree. Each of us have different strengths and we're drawn to different things. And I think in general, I think people do better when they focus on what they're really good at and really passionate about. So I don't think anybody should feel shame for focusing on Roe v. Wade, because it's direct killing of always innocent people. It doesn't mean that those children matter more than born people or anything like that. And it doesn't mean that everyone who's focusing primarily on other issues should instead be focusing on Roe v. Wade. Not saying that at all. But I disagree that the people who have focused primarily on Roe v. Wade ought to have been doing something else. I think they deserve a break and our kudos.
I don't know. I think that there's a tremendous amount of hypocrisy, within all parts of politics.
Mm-hmm.
And that's one of the reasons why it's so easy to divide people up.
Yeah.
Because how many times have you, like George Bush, President Bush, 43, Junior, Bush Jr., pro-life, right? Says he was pro-life, campaigned as being pro-life.
Yeah.
How many Iraqis died from his lies about weapons of mass destruction? How many children were killed in that process? How many people died from drone attacks, and this, that, and the other thing. So there is an amount of like hypocrisy there,
but
that takes away from the movement.
Never thought that George W. Bush, though, is ever have I thought that he was a champion of unborn life.
Yeah, all the pro-life people voted for him.
But that doesn't mean. I mean,
he did some things, that the pro-life people celebrated. Like he ended stem cell research. He instated the Mexico City Agreement,
which were good things,
but they're political things, and that's one of the problems, especially with the Republican versus Democrat
yes, polar
debate.
droid, I do agree with that.
Is that like they have us so divided on these partisan issues. Like there's so many people who are Republican by default only because of the issue of life, only because of abortion. That's the only reason
that might be
why they're Republican. And then they learn to kind of adopt these other Republican beliefs like low taxes, and they learn the talking points, and they can talk about immigration from a conservative perspective. But really the only thing that brought them into the Republican Party was the issue of life. Same thing with Democrats. There are many, many Democrats. The only reason why they're actually Democrats is because Democrats are pro-choice and pro-gay marriage. It's like those two things, and they rip people right down the middle. There are a lot of Democrats
though who are against abortion. So I don't necessarily. And it's interesting that like
not so many. But this comes down to like this idea. I just saw this interview with Biden. I don't know when it was from.
Oh yeah.
Where he's talking and he's like he's talking to a priest.
Oh,
it's a Catholic priest, and the priest is asking him like, how do you reconcile, being Catholic and being a pro-choice Democrat? And Biden's answer was, well, we're personally pro-life. He's like, with my family, we've made decisions that with our family, we're pro-life. We would never, ever, ever, have an abortion or encourage anyone in our family to have an abortion, except for maybe one of Hunter's kids. And, but that's what he said. And there's a lot of people who say that, like, I would never get an abortion, but I support the right for somebody to get one, which is that the easy way out, or is that really how they believe? Because what else is like that? Like if you're against, let's think of an equivalent issue. If you're against what?
Well, I mean, the one that most
just
people
murder.
Will say, yeah.
I mean, that's
so you would never personally kill someone, but you're
but
okay
that's like
with other people.
That's like too
it's
easy.
Too easy. I know, that's why.
But
she's right, and I'm not sure how to say the last part of your name, but there are lots of pro-choice Republicans, just not like term. That's totally true. I mean, I know actually, I actually don't think I could name a single Republican who wants to vote Democrat except for abortion. Maybe it's because they've allowed themselves to become brainwashed, which is kind of what you're saying, to adopt the talking points. Maybe that's the case. But I certainly have many reasons why I don't support the current National Democratic Party. Abortion is one of many, many, many at this point. Like I do not think that they are pro already born people. Education would be a great example of that. I was shocked at how we treated children during the pandemic, with schools being shut down. And I was shocked at the people who say that a pro-life person only cares about unborn life and not born life. It was so disheartening to see the same people turn a blind eye to the children who could no longer receive education, especially because people who had some type of, whether they had money or just the emotional kind of bandwidth to do more than perhaps other people, they either homeschooled their children or had them in a school where they would still be getting a good education. Whereas the people who were in schools that were completely shut down, that lost track of children, I forget the number of children in Minnesota who they never showed up for virtual school, and the school district has just lost track of them completely. A lot of children, at least hundreds, just in Minnesota. And then across the globe, we were talking about this. Like the things that we did with shutdowns have caused children, thousands of children in other countries, to never return to education. They started working, and now their families got used to working, or used to the children working, and now they won't return to school. So it's really difficult for people. Like I'm genuinely willing to say, like, okay, maybe there are some things I support that aren't good for born people, but I certainly think about born people a lot and care very much about how we are treating our born children and our born adults. And so to see people who make that claim about someone who's against abortion not care what we did with education, it's very difficult.
So I thought of a great example.
There's a question for us to answer later.
I thought of a great example.
Good.
So here's the example.
Okay.
Because we were talking about, just to refresh, about how people say, I would never personally ever get an abortion. If my daughter got pregnant, like I wouldn't encourage her to do so. Like we would do whatever it took to not have one.
Mm-hmm.
But a good example of this would be drugs, right? Heroin, or think of like a really crystal meth. Like I would never do heroin.
But if you want to, that's fine.
But it should be legal for people
example.
to choose it. I personally wouldn't do it, or fill in the drug, whatever drug it is.
But again, the reason why that doesn't quite compute is that choosing compare. I guess I was thinking compute makes sense. Maybe that's the wrong use of the word, but compute, like it doesn't make sense. Is because if I'm doing meth, that's my body that's doing meth. Whereas if I'm having an abortion, that's someone else's body. So I still think technically it needs to be a situation where, like, well, I wouldn't do that to someone else, but if you want to do that to someone else, that's fine. I think, I don't know, but good question. Are you pro dose, Tone? Are you pro the jab?
I'm pro people's choice to do it, but I'm very much against people being mandated, coerced, or having the wool pulled over their eyes, not knowing the full extent of what it is that they're actually doing. And you know what? Abortion is the same way. Like, how many horror stories have we heard? Somebody very, very close to me, actually, just recently decided to get an abortion. And the only reason why I know about this is because it was a botched abortion. They perforated this poor gal's uterus. She was 10 weeks pregnant, and this was in a they apparently found out in facility. And I don't know all the details, but they found out something was wrong with the baby's brainstem and severe issues, apparently, which they can be wrong about that stuff too in utero, especially that early on. But
this was not a back alley abortion in any way.
No, in the hospital, they told her 100% safe. Yeah. Don't worry about it. And so she went in for the procedure. I forget what it's called. It's the three letters, DNC. And they perforated her uterus, and also destroyed one of her fallopian tubes, and she'll never be able to have babies again.
Because of her uterus.
Yeah, but I mean, it's just that whole thing with medicine in general is you're not disclosed the risks anywhere near what we should be. And that's true with the mRNA doses. It's true with other medications that are prescribed. They do a good job, I guess, on TV advertisements or on the radio when they go through.
Side effects may include.
But with the doses, you never got that, and we know personally a lot of people who have been injured from it, and they had no idea that it was a risk whatsoever. So, but yeah, I think informed consent is probably the biggest thing that I support. Informed consent and bodily autonomy. And, with the issue of abortion, I realize that puts, it puts that issue in front and center, the my body, my choice. Like, it is a violation of bodily autonomy to restrict a woman's pregnant body to tell her that she can or cannot have an abortion. That does violate her bodily autonomy. And Justice Amy Coney Barrett acknowledged as such in her, was her pre-opinion of it in December or whenever it was that they held.
I think it was December.
But she did compare the bodily autonomy from an abortion to the bodily autonomy for the mRNA doses. She made that comparison.
I think she
in her oral arguments. That's what it was.
Doses in general.
Yeah, she was talking about that one specifically.
Was she?
But how
she said historical, I think.
You know, and her point in this part about it was that yes, it's violating a woman's bodily autonomy to tell her that she needs to carry the baby to term. And for those 9 months, it's an inconvenience. It's a burden. It's, but her point too is that they have the option to adopt, or the other option, which Saturday Night Live made fun of, but you can drop off babies at the fire station still. Like if you don't want your baby, you can carry your baby to 9 months. Safe haven laws, yeah. So, I mean, that's still a thing. And the other part that kind of gets to me, and going back to the culture of life, and this is the part where I totally disagree about. They'll say, oh, conservatives, they don't care about babies once they're born, or I don't see conservatives lining up to adopt, or who's going to take the unwanted babies. And it's like, I totally disagree with that so much. Like, we struggle with having babies. We have ever since we've tried. Luckily, by the grace of God, we have 3 healthy children. But we've had miscarriages. We've had issues conceiving. We had an ectopic pregnancy. A whole bunch of awful things, and very, very difficult to deal with. And so when I hear that argument, like, oh, who's going to take these unwanted babies? It's like, yeah, especially. And that's the thing with the adoption market, maybe not the right word to use to describe it, but if you want to adopt a baby, it's extremely competitive. That's what we're saying. Like,
there are more couples
you need money,
who want
you need to go in these
baby.
books. If you're not picture perfect, they're flipping through what parent, imagine if you're trying to decide the parent for your child. Who are you going to pick? The one who's got a net worth of 1.1 million, or the one who's living paycheck to paycheck, or the one who's 65 years old, or but babies are in high demand. And that's true with foster adoption too. Like if you want a brand new baby, a fresh, it's very, very difficult. You know what I mean? Like fresh out of the gate.
You're digging yourself in. Polar Droid, yes, about the incentives for getting the doses. He said they're offering grocery. I don't know if you're a boy or girl, sorry. Offering groceries and other things. And the Krispy Kreme donuts, I think, are what got to me the most, just because by that time when the Krispy Kreme donuts came out, at first I thought it was 1 donut if you got the dose. And then I found out it was like a year of donuts. And then I was genuinely kind of disgusted, because by that point, so I'm a nurse and I worked in 3 different states during the pandemic as a travel nurse, in New York and then Florida and then California. And I was pretty appalled at how little our public health institutions said about health, and I fully recognize that many ways of being healthy cost money and are not available for everyone, but some things don't, like no longer drinking pop, trying to sleep for an extra 30 minutes and watching one less show on Netflix, things like that. There are some things that don't cost money that can make a huge impact, and public health didn't care. And so when the Krispy Kreme thing came out, I was just like, that's sick. Like, maybe I'm becoming a hippie, but nobody should be having a donut a day. Nobody, child, adult, nobody. I desire that for no one. The reduces supermarket count. There will be lots of people. Oh yeah, sperm count, I think is what you mean, instead of supermarket count. And there's a peer-reviewed piece that was published in Andrology, and shows how much your sperm motility and concentration decreases after the mRNA doses. And it's pretty significant. And interestingly, the title of that piece and the discussion in that piece, I think those are the two sections, say that it's temporary and that it resolves. But if you have to download the PDF, you can't just go to the journal. You have to download the PDF and you have to read to the very last page. And then you look at the actual numbers, and the sperm motility and concentration go to negative 22% from baseline. And then the resolution, quote unquote, that they say is, I think, 19.4%. So it does not resolve to baseline. And that's a very small change.
So yeah, I wonder that too about the baby formula, and we're getting off the topic of abortion, but the baby formula shortage, I wonder if it's due to a higher demand of mothers buying baby formula.
Is that what you mean, Polar-Droid? That it's because less moms are breastfeeding because of the doses?
They can't breastfeed as long, or they're not producing as much milk,
or they're afraid to, because
I mean, it could be. We'll never know the truth behind that. It could be just another manipulation. It could be something what they said it was. We'll never know. We'll never know. But what was I going to go back to my point now with the culture of life? Oh, yes. Polar Droid brought up a good point about contraception, and Justice Clarence Thomas, now they're saying that he hinted in his opinion, which admittedly I have not read, that contraceptions are next. That somehow, and I don't know how that would be if you can't make
I have a guess.
Contraceptives illegal.
At how contraceptives were illegal, and making them legal was the start of what led us to abortion. And I know for a fact it might be Doe versus Gomez. I don't remember the court case. I used to know, but I know there's a court case where they were discussing whether or not abortion should be legal. And the reason for abortion being legal literally said, as long as contraceptives are legal, abortion must be legal, because contraceptives fail relatively frequently. And when that happens, people need to be able to turn to abortion. And I am not an attorney, so I can't fully connect the dots, but I know that what I said is true. I'll just stick with what I know for sure. So there's some connection.
If you're using the pill, a woman uses the pill, and say you use it perfectly, like you take it on time every day, however you're supposed to, what's the failure rate? Do we know?
I don't know. It's 9. I don't remember.
Isn't most of the failure come from human error? People forgetting to take it. Isn't that usually what it comes from?
A lot of things make it less effective too, but there's a lot of types of contraceptives. Like Depo-Provera is a shot that you get about once every 3 months. An IUD is inserted. Like you just get those, and then you don't need to remember to take anything. And they fail as well. I think I know 4 people who were conceived when their moms had an IUD in them. So nothing is, and then it's kind of scary because you have I think it's a copper wire. So you have that pokey thing floating around in your uterus with the baby. Yeah. They're all fine, but.
Did when she gave birth, did that come out?
I don't know in these cases.
But yeah, that brings up, the safety thing too, is I've heard and I've seen women talk about it, the IUD, how it's advertised as painless, and you just put it in. I hear it's incredibly painful when you get it put in. Like, it's not just like, but it's the same with the pill too. I've heard horror stories about that where it's advertised like you just take it and your pregnancy's over, no issues. And I've heard horror stories of women or girls bleeding out and at their homes all by themselves, and it just gets back to this. You mean the
morning after pill? You don't mean the pill to prevent? Well, typically when you say the pill, that's
the morning after.
The morning after pill.
The morning after.
Yeah, I have heard awful.
But it's like that's what you see with medicine a lot is these, the way the doctors talk about these procedures and these treatments and these medications. They talk about it like it's completely safe and harmless, and there will be no effects. And
back to our first very important but difficult conversation about like a 12-year-old who becomes pregnant from incest. I just don't see how someone could have her child aborted without her knowing. So
Called the marriage. That's a good point. Nothing is foolproof except abstinence. You know, is that a realistic approach? Abstinence,
Thanks,
teaching
Anne.
abstinence. Gosh, you know, I mean, you and I probably have different viewpoints on this, like, and maybe like guys and girls are different, but to change, to get into a culture of abstinence, like I think we would need a radical shift in our society, in our schools, in our families, because that's not the world we live in. You know
what?
And I'm not knocking it all. Like I totally agree with her point. Like that's the best way. But I just put myself back to when I was 13 and 14 and 15 and 16 and you know, priests can't even be abstinent. A lot of them. Some of them can. But it's a big order, and I guess I don't know how you teach that without radically changing society too.
One thing that could potentially change society is actually Roe v. Wade being overturned, and I know some might think that's a stretch, but
what do you mean it was overturned?
Right, and it has the potential to help change society in that sense, because as much as people will say abortion is not a contraceptive, I do think it's somewhat used as a birth control. And so if people know I can't turn to that, or the only way to turn to that is to take time off of work or school, drive across state lines, things like that. Like if it's harder to get an abortion and you know you might get pregnant if you do certain things, I do think there is a chance that more people will choose to be abstinent, at least until they're in, for plenty of people, it might not be marriage, but at least until they're with someone who they're like, yeah, if it happens, if I get pregnant, this is actually like a decent person who I could have a child with.
And this is where you're going to get pushback, and I'll push back a little bit too. It's like, this is where it gets unfair. This is where you go back to you want to bring us back to the 1950s, where it's the woman or the girl who's got to push back the guy, and keep her legs closed and dress modestly and basically cater to the overwhelming biological drives.
I don't think I said just women. I was thinking of men and women when I said that.
But that's how it was, and I have the feeling that that's how it would be again. And when I studied psychology, there was the Alfred Kinsey study. I think it was in 1940, or it was one of the first.
Kinsey, the creeper?
It was one of the first sexual surveys done in America, and what they found, overwhelmingly back in the day, is that men lost their virginity to prostitutes. And it was done kind of in a quiet way. Whereas, women at least had to keep the facade that they were virgins and that they were absent, and maybe many of them were. But some of these things are stereotypes in a way that we're going to need to figure out how to reset or push back, because you're right, it's not the woman's responsibility to ensure abstinence or to ensure she's not pregnant.
I think it's far more simple. Why would a woman who realizes that she doesn't have the option of abortion want to have sex with a douchebag of a man? Whereas if I have
because she can take the pill.
I mean,
are you saying in a world without contraception too?
No, I'm just talking about this world where it's harder to get an abortion. I think there's I think it will change some people's minds. I really do. Because I think that, and I mean, not everyone's different. Everyone's motivated by different things. But I think, and what I said before, if I did just say women, that was a slip, because I was thinking about both men and women. And that's why I said some people will be more likely to wait until they're with someone who, even if they're not considering marriage, if they're with someone who they're like, yeah, I could fathom having a child with this person. Or if I get pregnant, he at least is not gonna like sayonara. Like, you're right, it shouldn't be up to the woman. And yet women deserve so much more than a man who is going to ditch out if she becomes pregnant. So yeah, it's not up to the woman, but men like that deserve to be turned away. I mean, there's no excuse for that. So I don't know. I mean, I don't know how we.
I mean, I think that it's a cultural thing, you
Yeah.
know, and it's going to be rough riding. If we, God help us, if we're able to change the culture, if this is a pivot point where we're actually going to still progress as a society, but also culturally, we're going to become maybe more traditional again. Is that the right word? Go back to more traditional values. There's a whole generation or two or three that's lost in this. You know, that's cut right in the middle. You know, and
like
so
our generation.
This is what we were kind of talking about with welfare. Our generation and the younger ones, the people
Like
who are like
20 years
old, 20 years old right now, 20, 30, 15, 12, basically everyone who
like
grew
junior
up
high
in the late 90s to the 2000s especially. So if you grew up in the last 20 years, you're part of that. And if we're going to radically change from the path that we were on and go back to more traditional values, there's a whole bunch of people that I know personally, like, that are going to be lost in all of this. And we're going to have to.
What do you mean by lost?
It's not how they were raised.
Oh, yeah.
They were raised with this idea that there are no genders, that you can choose your pronouns, that you can have sex with whoever you want, that you can have pornography at a click.
Kinsey, is that who you were talking about?
Alfred Kinsey.
Isn't he like the first person to talk about, I don't want to say the wrong thing, but I think he's one of the first people who brought about like gender, people choosing their genders. Isn't he the one who did experiments on the twins? Was that Money? John Money or something? I don't know. I think Kinsey's one of them.
But that's my point, though, is that we have a lost generation.
Yes, we are. We're Catholic.
But yeah, that's something we're gonna have to deal with.
Yeah.
And if we don't, we're just gonna keep going the way that we were before, anyways.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
But how I grew up, it was very, and I'm not saying this with pride, I'm not saying this with sorrow, I'm not saying this with anything. This is just how it was when I grew up. In 8th grade, 7th grade, like your social ranking as a man or as a young teen was who you made out with, who was your girlfriend, how many girls liked you. Like, it was, the sexual thing was very, very, very important, prominent. It's something we talked about, we socialized around, and then that only became more prominent in high school and then college, which was the same thing. You know, it's like, oh, who do you hook up with, and who are you making out with? And there was no sort of, talk about traditional stuff. And so I'd only imagine that it's gotten worse since then in a lot of ways. So if,
in my experience, we talked about those things, but there was very much a focus on marriage, like who you would marry.
What do you mean?
Who you might like
be with
with
who?
Like always talking about boys for sure, but it was like there was always a strong focus on like getting married.
And this was with who? Your friends?
Oh, like starting in junior high.
With your
junior
friends.
high school, college. Yeah.
Which you had a really good
friends.
group of friends with very solid heads on your shoulders.
I'm just saying, like,
values.
We were really obsessed with boys too, but there was this strong, like, who would you consider like would you consider marrying them someday? Things like that, it's just a strong focus on that. Yeah. And not Florida, but Disney. I know Disney is one of the companies like Patagonia and Dick's and Tesla and others who will pay Amazon, I think. Yeah. Who will pay employees to cross state lines to get abortions.
The other interesting thing to think about is social media and the internet we tend, and especially when the internet first came about, like it was super free, right? Everything was very free. Like what you could do on the web, there was hardly any censorship. And I always remember like this was like in the year probably 2004 or something, but people would be like, Google Tiananmen Square. And they would compare what Google showed for Tiananmen Square from American Google versus Googling Tiananmen Square through China's Google. And it used to be like this, look how free America is. Look how restricted and censored that China is.
Yeah.
And social media is very similar to that too, like TikTok. So if you compare TikTok in China to TikTok in the United States, it's vastly different, right? TikTok algorithms in America reward sexual stuff, half nudity, crazy stuff, kind of dumbed down humor. There's a lot of good stuff on TikTok, don't get me wrong, but that's where the algorithms are rewarded. So you get all these girls who are on there, even if you're trying to flip through and looking for news on TikTok, like this might pop up on your screen every once in a while. And those are the ones that'll get millions of views, thousands of views. Whereas if you try to make something that's intellectual, you're probably going to get squashed. But if you go to TikTok in China, what they do, and I haven't tested this out, but this is what I've read about and heard, is that for their kids, their algorithms is about science. And it's about biology and math and educational material and things that like stimulate and value like intelligence or school and whatnot. So the question would be like, is our web in America free, or is it actually unfree and it's being used to corrupt our society and our people here? And this goes back to my point of creating a culture of life. How can we do it? Do we need laws that regulate how these algorithms work on social media? Because they're not that free anyways. So if the algorithms are going to reward promiscuity and sexual stuff and nudity and just stupidity and injury and bodily injury and stuff, like why not make it so that it promotes family, so that it promotes abstinence or promotes marriage or family or being a good father? Like if that's what we were flipping through as we're seeking information about Ukraine, comes up, how to be a good father or tips to being a good dad, which people make this stuff, but again, it's suppressed. It's not rewarded. How would that change our culture? Because these are like powerful influences, not just social media, but what we see on TV and the TV shows and the scripting for that. We've talked about in Mexico, I think it was in the 90s, like Mexican families used to be much bigger. They were having, I think on average, like 4 or 5 or 6 kids per family. And the Mexican government wanted to decrease the size of families so they weren't having as much population growth. So what they did is they started doing their soap operas, and they had smaller families on the soap operas with 1 kid or 2 kids. And how powerful that was, it actually did decrease the amount of children that people had. I'm not saying that that's a good thing, but I'm just saying it shows the power that the media and culture has to influence behaviors on the grassroots level. So bringing that back to social media, it's like, what is it doing in terms of creating the culture of life that we need, or is it doing the exact opposite?
Probably the opposite.
And then you look at like the traffic that's done online with pornography would be another great example. Like I think like 70%, and I'm throwing this stat up there, but it's very high, of the traffic and the searches and the time spent on the web. A huge chunk of it is with pornography. And like, if that's the case, like what's that actually doing to the culture? What's that doing to families and marriages?
We know it's affecting individual brains.
And it affects individual brains, but so why not why not? I mean, I get we have freedom of speech, but is pornography speech? Like, no, it actually isn't. So it could be incredibly restricted instead of what it is so huge and virtually free. You know, like growing up, you know, when I was a kid, the only pornography we would stumble across would be like a Playboy magazine in our neighbor's garage that he kept under a thing that we'd sneak and grab. You know, like, yeah, that's not good either. But like, that's where our minds kind of found. So if you're just one click or one button away, it's like,
or one pop up.
Like maybe that'll have a huge effect too. Like, I mean, because how many I don't want to use that word, but pregnancies that were unintended are the result of like these cultural dysfunctions that we experience on like a minute by minute.
Yeah, I think it's a great point.
And if you can create a different culture, so instead of what I was talking about when I was a kid, where you were rewarded by how many girls you made out with, or who your girlfriend was, or if she was this cute or that cute, like if the culture could be created so that your pecking order is based off of what a gentleman you are, or the provider that you can be in the future, or so that everything you're doing isn't building up to make up with girls, it's to be a provider or to be a man. Like that could have enormous effects.
Just to be a decent, person, or are you smart? Are you creative? Are you industrious? Things like that. Yeah.
So, well, thank you, everybody.
Yeah, thank you. Have a good night.
Yep. We'll do another live soon. Maybe we'll talk about the doses this next time. That's one of our not favorite topics, but
it's the one we've researched the most recently.
Medical freedom. Yeah. And we actually are finishing a book that we're writing. It's called Medical Justice for All. And it should be out this fall. So,
thanks, guys.
Thank you.